What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I am Rick Urrutia, here with my co-host, Jerry Scapaciulo.
Hey, everybody, I'm Jerry. Glad to see you tonight.
And Brian Pfeiffer.
Good evening, listeners. This is Brian.
This week, we're bringing you the news, followed by an interview with Brother David Van Deusen, president of the Vermont AFL-CIO. Some of our listeners may already be aware that the Vermont AFL-CIO has been implementing some very progressive changes that are characteristic of social justice unionism. On our 11th episode, we had the Federation's Executive Vice President, Katie Harris, on our show, and she spoke a lot to these changes. So today we're just going to follow up with President David Van Deusen and learn a little bit more of what's going on over there in the Vermont AFL-CIO. But first, Brian is going to lead us off with some follow-up news from UAW Local 180 in Racine. Brian, what's going on over at Local 180?
Yes, thanks, Rick. We have a struggle going on in Racine that we've been covering here at We Rise Fighting for months. The workers there, the members of UAW 180, have went on strike in May against CNHI at Case Holland. The big issues are wages and health care. There are some wage increases proposed by the company, but those wage increases will be eaten up by healthcare increases the company is proposing. So the workers have stayed on strike over that, as well as other worksite and workplace issues. We've interviewed here President Madi Yassin, and the members of UAW 180 have been out now for 6.5 months, and they're facing winter being on strike here in mid-November already. The strike support right now is urgent. They need strike support right now, today, and moving forward. So the leaders of UAW 180 and ourselves, We Rise Fighting, and many others across Wisconsin and the country have been helping them with the strike in various ways, including calling a Saturday, December 17th, solidarity rally at 2 p.m. at the UAW Union Hall, 3323 Kearney Avenue. That's Kearney Avenue in Racine, Wisconsin. That's the UAW 180 Union Hall. There will be a convergence there, and then we will go to the picket lines immediately afterward. The goal is to have vehicle caravans from various locations across Wisconsin, from labor federations, park and rides, various other places, union halls, and also across the Midwest to Racine on Saturday, December 17th. Union and community organizations are encouraged to bring supplies for the strikers, such as kids' gifts for the holiday, gift cards, non-perishable foods, coffee, hand and foot warmers, winter hats and gloves, always, but especially on December 17th. So the idea is to have the car caravans and the vehicles packed with these supplies to bring them to the hall. They are very much needed, these supplies, by the strikers. You can call UAW 180 at 262-631-5980. That's 262-631-5980 for more information, including how to make monetary donations. So there are labor federations in Wisconsin, for example, contributing monetary donations to the strike fund, and that's very much needed as well. Leaflets for UAW 180 can be found at the We Rise Fighting Facebook page, which is facebook.com We Rise Fighting Labor Podcast. That's facebook.com We Rise Fighting Labor Podcast. Supporters of 180, UAW 180, are encouraged to share the information far and wide as soon as you hear this. That will be much appreciated. Onward to December 17th in Racine. There will be more developments on this show going forward leading up to December 17th. But please share the information. Start organizing a car caravan from your local or wherever you can, if you're in the Midwest especially. And if you can't come on December 17th, make sure that your local labor union or community organization sends some type of monetary donation or other contribution to UAW 180 strikers. There's about 700 strikers on strike, plus their families, and they're facing down winter, so they need our support. Solidarity forever. And Rick's next. Thank you.
Right on.
Solidarity to those striking workers. Do whatever you can, send strike support, send bodies to the solidarity event. Up next, we have Jerry with some news from Pride at Work.
Okay, up here in Boston is a developing situation going on, basically around urging labor locally to uh, get involved in a fight back movement against neo-Nazi activity in Boston and Massachusetts, activity which is just growing and growing. There have been over 300 incidents of just one group, the Patriot Front in Massachusetts this year. So recently, there was a motion in the Greater Boston Labor Council to urge the Boston police, who have not been forthcoming about their investigation of the July 4th attack on an African American man by the Patriot Front in plain view of the press and onlookers in Boston. Uh, Despite that, the Boston police have not been very forthcoming at all about their investigation, who they have interviewed. Is there going to be anybody pressing charges in this incident? And the African American civil rights community, including the NAACP and other groups, are very dissatisfied with the lack of information that has been given to the community about this dreadful thing that happened. So recently, in the Greater Boston Labor Council, a motion was made to uh, get the Boston police to disclose what they're doing, if anything, around this attack and make this a labor issue, because Nazis are a labor issue. Uh, this one group, Patriot Front, has organizations in 48 states in the United States. 48, and they're very active. And history has shown us that Nazis do not go away by their own accord. And they have to be pressured, they have to be faced up to, they have to be pushed back. And if that requires, a violent activity on the part of those of us that do not want to see fascism grow anymore in the United States, so be it. That's what history demands of us. So there is that. So I've got more to say about other things happening up here in Massachusetts, but right now I'm just going to pass this over to Rick.
All right, on my end, just reporting on the 48,000 workers that are poised to strike. The strike starts tomorrow at the UC University of California campus system. Nearly 48,000 University of California workers, including researchers, postdoctoral scholars, teaching assistants, and graders, will go on strike starting tomorrow. The strike will affect all of UC's 10 campuses. Nearly 98% of the 36,000 members voted to approve the strike authorization. Compensation is a key labor dispute in all of this. There was a quote in an NBC article that stated, quote, extremely low compensation, many workers making less than $24,000 a year, is leaving workers severely rent burdened and struggling to remain in academia. UC's failure to support diverse workforce undermines the quality of research and education across the system, Rafael Jaime, president of UAW 2865, said earlier this month. The union represents more than 19,000 teaching assistants, tutors, and readers. So that's what's going on. That strike starts tomorrow. Solidarity to all 48,000 of those strikers. Jerry, you also had something to report now about a December 9th event regarding Starbucks.
Yes, Workers United, the union that is organizing the rank and file, the 335 stores that have unionized of Starbucks in the country, is calling on December 9th at every major urban center in the country a rally to note the 1 year anniversary of the unionization of the first Starbucks store uh, up there in Buffalo, in New York. About it will be a year on December 9th. That's going to be a Friday, and we're having a big rally up here in Boston, but I'm sure there's going to be rallies on the West Coast, in Chicago, Detroit, everywhere. There's going to be rallies on that day. So please keep an eye out for that. And one thing I forgot to mention in the message I just gave a minute ago about fighting back against the Nazis in Boston was that Pride at Work, the LGBT constituency group of organized labor, has also been part of urging the Boston police to become forthcoming with their investigation. And there's more support is coming for that. We're having a meeting Thursday in Boston about it, so there'll be more to report in the future. That's about it.
All right, and on my end, a couple of more things. HarperCollins workers strike for better pay and benefits. Unionized employees at HarperCollins went on strike Thursday, saying they plan to stop working until they reach an agreement on a new contract. The HarperCollins union represents about 250 employees in editorial, publicity, sales, marketing, legal, and design. In a statement, the union said its members, who have been working without a contract since April, wanted better family leave benefits and higher pay. Olga Brudstavo, the president of Local 2110 of the UAW, which represents unionized HarperCollins employees, said the union had decided to go on indefinite strike after negotiations with the company stalled. The union is proposing that HarperCollins raise the minimum starting salary to $50,000 from $45,000. It has also demanded that the company address the lack of diversity in its workforce. Solidarity to those HarperCollins workers. All right, and finally, in labor news, just an update on the potential railway strike. What CNBC reports to us this week is that the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division, the third largest rail union in the country, is extending its status quo period. Its status quo period is basically a period that says no strike, no lockout. The company can't lock out the workers can't go on strike. So they're extending their status quo period, during which it wants to continue negotiations with the freight rail carriers. So now the earliest they could strike is December 9th. I also went on the website for the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division, and they mentioned that they would be using this time, quote, "We will now have an opportunity to educate Congress and obtain a better bill written for railroad workers, not the railroads." So that's the update on the railway workers. We now turn our attention to our interview with Brother David Van Deusen from the Vermont AFL-CIO. Brian, could you please go ahead and kick things off for us?
All right, welcome, Brother Van Deusen. We're grateful to have you on here tonight. We're honored, doing some great work up there in Vermont, and we just like to start with if you could tell us a little bit about your background and growing up and how you became a member of the union movement and a president of the Vermont AFL-CIO. Thanks.
Sure, pleasure to be here with you guys today. So I come from a union household. That's not a very unique story, probably for many union leaders throughout the country. My father was a union officer in his union, Public Employees Federation of New York. And in 2019, myself and a number of other AFL-CIO members up here in Vermont ran a slate of candidates, a progressive slate called United, in contested elections at our convention. And we won nearly every single seat. We've had two other elections since then. Our slate continues to win. We've been sweeping elections for the last few years. We have another election coming up in 2023 that we already feel good about. We're basing our movement up here on change. We have a 10-point program, our little green book, which maps out the agenda not only of United, but since we took office, the platform of the Vermont AFL-CIO. We believe that building power needs to be the priority of labor. And you build power not through lobbying, not through backing shitty candidates that you're lucky if they get your back after they get elected. You build power by organizing on the shop floor, in the factories, in the workplaces that we already have unionized. And you build power by organizing new shops. And you shouldn't be afraid to articulate a real working class left agenda, which seeks to capture the aspirations, concerns, and visions of regular working people. And we are unafraid of those things. And we're going to do whatever it takes to not only build a stronger movement of organized labor up here in the Green Mountains and beyond, but of the working class general as it faces challenges and attacks from both the right wing and increasingly far right wing in this country, a neo-fascist right wing, but also from neoliberals, largely found within the Democratic Party. So our task is immense. The things we need to do are large, and it's not going to be done. We're not going to win overnight. We're in it for the long haul, and we want to set an example up here in Vermont where our union membership has been growing consistently over the last few years, and we want to set that example for the rest of the nation.
Okay,
Jerry, you got the next question?
sure. Hey, Brother David, it's really great to see you and hear you on our program. Thanks for being here again. Been following, what's your programs up there in the Vermont AFL-CIO, more specifically the resolutions that you passed, and the one I think it was maybe last year in which you called for a general strike in the event of Trump not going forward with his coup in an extra way that he already did. Uh, as you probably know, Sarah Nelson from the airline flight attendants has been dropping the words general strike wherever she speaks. Do you think that's a real possibility? And would it take a coup to make that happen, or do you see other conditions that might, set a foundation for having a general strike?
Well, first of all, Sarah Nelson is a great national union leader. We're proud to be allies with her here in Vermont. And I've had the pleasure of meeting with her personally at the convention we had, the National AFL-CIO convention earlier this year in June in Philadelphia. So she has not been afraid to call spade a spade, and that's what we appreciate about her. Now, when we had a vote of our members up here regarding a general strike, that was 2 years ago, roughly, when Biden won the election for president. And that was clear. It was right after. In November, we had this vote of our members. And it wasn't just a resolution. It was an authorization for the elected executive board, which of course I serve on as president, to call for a general strike in the event that there was not a transfer of power, peaceful transfer of power on January 20th of that year. We came very close to having a coup happen. There was an attempted coup. January 6th, the insurrection, that shows how serious that situation was. We were right in our analysis. And we were right to understand that you can't just, or it'd be foolish to think that you could call for a general strike a day before or the day after something horrible happens. That takes some planning. That takes some logistics. That takes some education. And so we had our vote, and we could have just made a proclamation as the executive board. But we felt that something of that magnitude had to be debated by the members. Something that's central to what United seeks to do is create real union democracy and empower workers to debate openly and raise their hands and voice their opinion and make the major decisions of our day. And this is one of those cases. We encouraged a vigorous debate. We tackled the issue, opened the floor to members to speak on at our convention for well over an hour before the question was called and before a vote was given. When the vote was given, 89% of our delegates, 89% voted to authorize us to call for a general strike. Okay. But that was not something we took lightly. In the months that followed, we worked closely with allies in Burlington, and we worked with allied city councilor in Montpelier, our state capital. Of course, Burlington's our largest city. And we began to open up discussions, which is symbolically important for us, in the town of Bennington, which of course is the birthplace of the Green Mountain Boys, another fight against those that would oppress our liberty, but that one a couple centuries ago. And we started talking about what the general strike would look like and where we would have support and not. In Burlington, and this is why elections do matter, we previously endorsed and helped elect a majority of the city council being from the Democratic Socialist Progressive Party. And so we had friends, serious friends, a majority of friends on that city council who took the threat to democracy as seriously as we did and still do. And were willing to work with us on a coordinated general strike, which could have maintained essential services like the water plant, right, wastewater plant, electricity, but could have shut down other aspects of the city. So those discussions were underway. Now, thank God we did not have to pull the trigger on this. But let's not pretend that we're out of the woods. Let's not pretend that democracy is safe. Let's not feel so great about the fact that there was not a neo-fascist wave in the election the other day. Let's recognize that the right wing still is going to, in all likelihood, capture control of the House of Representatives. There are election deniers who have won across this country, and they may or may not take control of the Senate. The situation is dangerous. It continues to be dangerous. The Republican Party continues to be a dangerous anti-democratic force, even in terms of a representational democracy in the United States. And we need to expect and take steps to be empowered and have the working class and unions ready to take action should there be another coup attempt in 2 years in the aftermath of the next presidential election. And let's not kid ourselves either, that the experience we saw with Trump, many of the things that happened were ham-handed and half thought out. If you take a more sophisticated person and put them in that position with the same goals, the danger grows. So we need to be ready. We need to be prepared to do whatever it takes to make sure fascism does not come to our republic. And the very least we could do in such a situation is throw down our tools, walk off the job site, and say capitalism is not going to work. You know, if we're not going to have even vestiges of democracy in our nation anymore.
Okay. Just before I pass it over to Rick, I got a follow-up question and comment. Down here in Massachusetts, which many consider like the home of social democracy and the most liberal place you can be living in the United States today, there have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of neo-fascist incidents just in the first 6 months this year. And there are at least 14 organized groups operating in the state of Massachusetts. In July 4th of this past year, 100 of them marched openly in Boston, beat up an African-American brother. And some of us are trying to get the Central Labor Council in the city of Boston to look into the matter more forcefully. And it's not been easy. Do you think that, well, let me put it this way. Are you having those kinds of incidents up there in Vermont? I know some of them have been happening in New Hampshire, but in Vermont, have you been dealing with that up there?
Look, it's no utopia up here in Vermont. You know, we have our own boneheads or idiots, but at the same time, I would not say that organized violent right-wing activity is measurable in any way, shape, or form compared to most of the United States of America. In that way, I think that we are, while far from perfect and plenty of challenges and prejudices that need to be overcome, Vermont does have a stronger sense of community. In my opinion, part of the reason for that is our town meeting traditions, where everybody comes together once a year, where all the citizens become the legislative branch of government and get to debate and raise their hand and have to look each other in the eyes during town meeting day. And I think that goes a long way to building that kind of solidarity, if you will. Even our Republican Party up here and our Republican governor, who just overwhelmingly won an election, publicly opposes Trumpism at most chances he gets, and called for him to be ousted and to resign from the White House after the January 6th coup. So even those whose economic ideas are certainly far from that of organized labor of my own, you know, they still maintain degrees of civility. But when we talk about fascism generally, I mean, the truth is, if we get to a place where does not appear to be a viable left-wing pole, a militant left-wing pole that truly recognizes or reflects working class values, then when the status quo fails people, when the status quo makes it so you can't afford to put fucking oil in the heater to heat their homes during the winter, people are going to turn to what they think is an alternative. And right now, in much of the United States, the far right, the Nazis, the neo-fascists, the Trump folks are trying to position themselves as that alternative. So I understand how one could be drawn in that direction, but it's a false solution. Now, how do we overcome fascism? We overcome fascism in two different ways. One, by building a true left-wing, working class left-wing alternative, a pole left of the Democrats, a pole that is independent of the Democrats. It is not afraid to call out the Democrats largely as being class enemies, as neoliberals, you know, who are still hell-bent on privatization in many cases. Now, we can't be afraid to make that separation. But the other way, because that will bring people in, they'll see us as the alternative, and that will draw more into the movement. It'll grow our power more, and we'll be able to get more things done. And I could get to how we get things done in a bit. But the other way we defeat fascism is not by having peace vigils or singing kumbaya. What fascists understand is force. This has historically always been the case. I used to be a member of an organization that was very effective back in the day of fighting fascists called Anti-Racist Action. And what we learned over and over and over again, when fascists try to organize in a town or city, the one thing they understand is getting the shit kicked out of them. And because they glorify violence so much that when you physically push them out of town and beat the shit out of them, that destroys their recruiting abilities because it takes away the one thing that they hold irrationally so close to their chest that's so important to them. We need to confront fascism. We need to confront fascists, and we can't be hesitant or afraid to use force when we do confront fascists. That's how we're going to beat them in part in our country. Our grandfathers understood that when they stormed the beaches of Normandy. I think it's time that we start to remember that in this day and age as well.
Right on.
That's what's up. All right, Brother David. The Vermont AFL-CIO is very strong on women's rights and has created a women and gender equity network to fight for the reproductive liberty amendment in Vermont. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
I am happy to say that coming out of the election the other day, a constitutional change that guarantees, with no ifs, ands, or buts, or qualifications, or any of that, guarantees a woman's right to control her own body, to have an abortion, passed with a 77% plus vote. Every single town where the results are sent into the Secretary of State's office so far, every single city, every single town, 240 plus, has voted in favor of this amendment. That says something. In this rural state, right? In this rural state, everybody, for all statistically speaking, got behind the fact that it's none of your goddamn business, right? Government, to tell women what they can, should, or shouldn't do with their own bodies. We supported that very strongly. We came out early in support, where we had a resolution at our last convention in support of this effort. And through the leadership of our women's caucus, we dedicated resources, made countless phone calls, right? Phone trees, phone banks, to support the amendment. We took our PAC money, and instead of sinking it into elections that may or may not bear fruit, we bought radio ads as the Vermont AFL-CIO in support of the amendment. And this was a huge victory last night. I know a couple other states had similar votes on the agenda. No one came close to 77% support. You know, we passed it overwhelmingly. I was glad to see similar things pass in, I believe it was Michigan and California, if I'm correct. But in Vermont, we hit it out of the park. But this is just the start of a fight. Next, we have to do is pass shield laws to protect people from being prosecuted who come up here for treatment or get treatment somehow through Vermont. So we need to do these kind of things, and then we need to go much further, right? We need to push for a society in a broader way where not only do women, of course, right, should have the right to control their own body, but we need to fight to make sure that we close the pay gap, right? We need to fight to make sure that sexual harassment is a thing of the past in our workplaces. We have a long way to go to build true gender equity in the United States, in Vermont, everywhere. And it's going to be a long, hard fight, just like everything else we're talking about tonight, but it's one that has to be waged. Let's not forget that half the workforce, right? Half the workers, we're going to talk about working class, right? Half the people on the planet are women. We can't pretend to be supporting the rights of working people if we're not supporting the rights of women. Women's rights and workers' rights need to be synonymous in every single union person's mind. And that's what we strive for here. And that's why we put a priority in building our gender, our women and gender equity network.
Okay. Brother David, now what advice would you give those of us, or anyone for that matter, who wants to bring in an international viewpoint towards what organized labor should be doing? I'm old enough to remember in the 80s, some of us toured Central America union leaders around New England uh, to speak about how the AFL-CIO was undermining their efforts to have their own independent democratic unions. It seems to me that the AFL-CIO has gone back on what John Sweeney tried to do when he got rid of some of that business when he took over about 15 years ago. What role would you like to see labor play in supporting international unions and what we can do to bring our sisters and brothers overseas into our consciousness?
Well, capital is international, so therefore the struggle of workers needs to be international as well. And I don't preach in the choir on this one, but it's just true. So what do we need to do? We need to find ways, direct ways, union to union, worker to worker, to reach our hand across borders to lend solidarity. I mean, the corporations are producing goods and services all throughout the world. We need to link up unions and workers from various industries to set global standards for the trades they apply, for the jobs that they do. Now, here in Vermont, in our small way, we've tried to have an international perspective. Just a few weeks ago, we were honored to be asked to have a joint meeting with the union leadership from northern Syria, specifically from the autonomous region of Rojava. And now Rojava, some folks may or may not know, is in the midst of a social revolution where they're fighting for a secular direct democracy in a Middle Eastern country, right? Or in part of a Middle Eastern country. It's pretty amazing. These were the same folks that drove ISIS out of large swaths and are continuing to fight ISIS, large swaths of Syria. So meeting with them, we got to hear about many of their challenges and struggles they're going through, and they wanted to hear about ours, right? And how we're trying to change the politics where we live. Because the more points of view we could get, I think the better served we're going to be in our perspective when it comes to change on a global level. Because ultimately, the change that we envision, a more directly democratic world, more economic equity, more, more social security. These are type of things that can't just be achieved only in one little corner of the world. They're certainly not going to be achieved just in Vermont. And ultimately, the United States is just the largest part, but only part of a larger global, interconnected global economy. So these issues need to be thought of in an international way. Now, what we heard from our brothers and sisters in Rojava, was that they're having a very hard time with many of their organizing goals because, surprise, surprise, they're under bombardment and attack from Turkey. So one of the most immediate things that they have to deal with is this invasion by a NATO country, I might add, that has occupied swaths along the border, which I do think that when we're talking about internationalism, I think it's wise to try to put things in perspective. All you're going to see on the nightly news is about the Ukraine, right? And how horrible Russia is for invading the Ukraine. And I don't condone that at all. But what about NATO countries occupying other nations, right? We don't talk about that. What we should be doing is reaching our hand out to the unions in Rojava, in that autonomous region, who are fighting for a progressive world, not a regressive world, not a corrupt world, but a progressive left-wing society where workers and farmers get a fair deal in society, right? We should be reaching our hands out to them and seeing how we could provide solidarity directly to them. Instead of getting wrapped up in what the other is doing, right? Now, and we could talk about all over the world when it comes to that. What about the embargo of Cuba? What about the people in Palestine, right? What about workers all over the world who every day are suffering under imperialism and capitalism? And how can we build solidarity with them? And how can we demonstrate that the fight we're having locally is connected to the fight internationally? I don't pretend to have the answers to these issues, but I do know that the labor movement on a national scale needs to do a hell of a lot better job. And there's no goddamn way we should be taking marching orders from any government bureaucrat, right, who simply is looking out for this economic self-interest of the capitalist class in this country. Those same capitalists in this country have no problem attacking our union members when we want good health care and better raises, right? And we shouldn't be defending them overseas.
Thanks.
Right on. I feel that. Now, Brother David, you've already given us some insight, as to your views, thoughts on race and solidarity, and through anti-racist action, you mentioned. But I wanted to ask something a little more specific. In June of 2020, when the protests against the murder of Brother George Floyd were sweeping across the world, the Vermont AFL-CIO published a statement titled, quote, "Vermont AFL-CIO stands with Black communities in resistance." So my question is, why did the Vermont AFL-CIO publish and circulate this statement to its members?
There were protests and riots, when we'll recall, going on all over the country. This was an inflection point in American history. This was a time when millions of people were saying enough is enough. It's time to overcome racism, and it's time to say we need a truly equitable society. It would have been akin to collaboration to say nothing. I was pleased that we were the first state labor council in the country, and to this day, the only one, who overtly came out in support of Black self-determination, something that I think isn't said enough or discussed enough in this country. We also demanded not only police reform, but we also demanded a release of Black political prisoners who've been held in prisons across the nation for generations, largely who were part of the previous fights, be it through the Black Panther Party or what have you, back in the day. And we donated money, some modest resources, to the Jericho movement, which works on behalf of political prisoners, as well as to our local Black Lives Matter group in the Burlington area. We called for our members also to support the protests, right? And there were protests going on in Vermont and all across the country. Now, these are small things, but these are things that are just right to do. Just like when we talk about freedom, equity, being treated the same, getting the same pay for women, we have to talk about the same type of issues when it comes to the Latino community or the Black community. I mean, look, the thing that brings us together, that ties us together, that makes us potentially powerful is our class. We all share the same class. We are working class people, and we have differences, but we have similar interest because of the economic class we're in. But that doesn't take away from or negate the fact that there's very specific histories of oppression against certain people in this country, right? That's true. I mean, ask any Native American person right now, right? And for those reasons, we still need to lend our hand in solidarity to those communities as they fight to right the wrongs, the historic wrongs that their people have suffered for hundreds of years. In Vermont, we try to work with the Abenaki tribes, Native American tribes. One of their chiefs' name is Don Stevens. He's a good friend of mine. We've had them to our conventions. We are working with the Abenaki tribes in a coalition called Renew New England, which is essentially looking to build a New England-wide Green New Deal. And as partners with them in that organization, we're able to amplify their calls for their specific issues to be addressed through a Green New Deal type set of legislation, right? So their community can be served, and not just lower CO2s, but they want to see the Native population, the Native Americans, the Abenaki get jobs out of this, right? Good family sustaining jobs. And they also want to reclaim aspects of their historic rights on their traditional lands, which we seek to amplify and get their back when those issues come up. So the United States is far from a homogenous country. We're a very diverse country, no matter how you define that. And we need to recognize the specific struggles that different communities have faced, and we need to support them in those struggles. But at the same time, I would caution that we should not get lost in putting too much an emphasis on identity politics. We need to come back still and be grounded in the thing that unites us, not divides us. And for us, that's being working class.
Okay. Brother David, surely you've been following the kind of upsurge in labor organizing that's sweeping across the country now with Starbucks, the Amazon Workers Union, the election of Sean O'Brien to head the Teamsters, the fight for a direct election of UAW officers at their national convention, and similar things. What if you had a blueprint in your mind somewhere, or even on paper, what role would you see these new rank and file organizing movements going around the country play in creating this left pole that you mentioned earlier? This place for people to go that really want to make a change.
Well, there's a couple of pieces to it. I think that what we're seeing with Starbucks organizing, which we had our first Starbucks organized not long ago in South Burlington with SEIU, and that's great. But with the Starbucks organizing, and also with the start of Amazon organizing at Amazon, we're seeing many more younger workers come into the movement who have energy, who want to engage, who haven't yet been had it slammed into their head that there's limitations to what they could achieve, which is a good thing. We need to be able to dream beyond the confines of the status quo if we're ever going to transform society. And I think that bringing in the younger workers, that helps us as a labor movement think bigger, and we need that. But with what we see with Sean O'Brien, what we see with the UAW and their direct elections, this is crucial too on an institutional level. Now, I firmly believe that the way that we transform labor is not through a really good essay, right? Not through a rally. We transform labor by empowering the rank and file. And when the rank and file have a vote and a say, not just who they directly get to elect as their leadership on whatever level, but on the policies of the labor movement itself. The more you empower them, the more they're going to have a sense of ownership over those decisions that labor takes, that makes, right? And if you're going to ask people to go to the barricade, they damn well better have a sense that they own that decision for there to be barricades to begin with. So I believe that what we need to do is fight like hell within our state federations, within our CLCs, within our internationals, within our locals, to democratize them. And that will help us bring more workers to the table. And as more workers are at the table, and not just the same 5 stewards at the local meeting, that's when we're going to get some more creative thinking. That's when we're going to get people unafraid to take action. And that's when we're going to get more participation from the grassroots as we try to make change. And this gets back to what we started to say before. How does one make change? Now, I've already posited that we don't make change by sending high-paid people with suits and ties on to Washington, D.C. to lobby. I've said till I'm blue in the face, we don't make change by endorsing every shitty Democrat across the country, and then we act shocked when they don't pass the PRO Act, or they don't get rid of the filibuster, or they don't pass the voting reforms, right? When they don't pass the Green New Deal. Don't be shocked. They're not going to do it. When they're going to do things that we want them to do is not based on having a scotch, an expensive scotch with Chuck Schumer. It's going to be because they fear us. Fear is what's going to motivate them to start to make change. Now, in the 1930s, I have much respect for Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. But let's not pretend that that just happened because Franklin Roosevelt waved the magic wand and said, let it be so. There was a legitimate fear in this country that if serious foundational changes were not made that impacted the working class and the poor, that there would be a revolution in this country. And they feared us. There were millions of people having work stoppages. There was millions of people involved with street actions. There was militant pressure at every level of society for change to happen. And faced with an alternative of a revolution, or even just the fear that that could be possible versus serious systematic change, the decision was to go with the New Deal. And that's the kind of fear we need to be installing in the politicians today, regardless of who wins any given election.
All right. Brother David, you've already given us a lot to walk away with here, and I've enjoyed the interview very much. I want to ask you also very directly this: as far as today's youth, as far as young workers in the labor movement, what bits of advice would you have for them? Any nuggets of wisdom for them, if you could share that?
Never accept limitations. That's number one. I feel that we grow to believe there is limitations in what we could achieve as a labor movement. It's beaten into our head every day at every level. There is no limitations. The limitation is your imagination and the solidarity with your class and the willingness of your class, the working class, to take action. Big Bill Haywood, one time head of the IWW a long time ago, said something along the lines of, all we have to do is put our hands in our pocket and we have the capitalist class licked. I mean, it sounds that simple because it is that simple. And it's a bit of propaganda meets magic that folks don't understand that as an a priori thing every second of every day. We have the power. We just have been trained to not use it. We've been trained to fear it. Once we get rid of that, once we throw off the shackles of the notion that real change is impossible, then radical change becomes not only possible, but also probable. And that's the direction we need to go. And that's the fight we're in. It's not a short fight, it's a long fight, but I have no doubt that in the end, we will win.
Campaigns around the country, and we're beginning to, seek out ways we can help whatever railroad union strike must go on. But if you're following, well, you probably are, the railroad workers organizing, what hope do you see in that? How do you see that potential effort if they go on strike later on in the month?
Well, how the situation with the railroads resolves itself needs to be up to railroad workers. And if the workers decide that one day off or whatever it is that they had in that TA isn't good enough, and that they need real time off, I can't imagine having one day off or whatever the crazy tentative agreement was. But if they make that decision and go on strike, we need to be there 100%, all of us, not just railroad workers, in solidarity. And we need to live by the old maxim that we never cross picket lines, right? The Teamsters are great at that. I give the Teamsters credit for that. Teamsters don't cross picket lines. You know what? No working person should ever cross a picket line. And I don't care if they set up picket lines at railroad stations or if they do it down at the local government office, wherever they choose to picket. And I hope they're creative with it. Let's respect those picket lines. Let's get behind them 100% and lend whatever support and solidarity we have as our means.
Right on.
Right on. All right. Thank you, Brother Van Deusen, for spending some time with us today. And thank you, everyone who tuned in. Our podcast will continue to bring you insightful interviews from people in the labor struggle. So please keep tuning in, and thank you for listening already. Good night, everyone. Solidarity to all.
En esta vida se debe respetar a nuestra dignidad. Si la justicia tú apoyas, pero guardas el rencor a niños inocentes separados sin razón. Ay, no saben cómo sufre nuestra gente y no sabe cómo ellos sufren. Ay, es hogar aunque no somos residentes y todos juntos vamos a cantar. Viva mi gente y nuestro color, viva la raza, no olvidemos el dolor. Viva mi gente y nuestro valor, chinga la migra alma del corruptor. Viva mi gente y nuestro color, viva la raza, no olvidemos el dolor. Viva mi gente y nuestro valor, chinga la migra alma del En vida, en muerte, en lucha, mi gente, en comunidad, victoria siempre. We come from maíz, from the clay to the streets. Strings that I got from the drums and the beats. Dreams in our feet as we march to the east, to the south, to the west, to the north, to Aslan. Brown buffalo, deep underneath. Raíces, raíces, we come from belief. The food that we eat is the love that we need. It come from the seed, work that we bleed. God bless elote, man, feeding the streets. God bless elote, man, feeding the streets. Desiertos y ríos han cruzado hoy, arriesgan hasta la muerte para esta generación, manipulando toda la información, usando fuerzas armadas contra la gente del sol. No saben cómo sufre nuestra gente, no saben cómo sufrimos. Es hora que no somos residentes. El dolor. Viva mi gente, nuestro valor, chinga la migrama del corruptor. Viva mi gente, nuestro color, viva la raza, no olvidemos el dolor.